Japanese sailors saw it coming at night. At first, they thought it was just another American patrol boat. Small, wooden, harmless. Then the sea exploded. A single cannon shot ripped straight through a steel hull. Another followed, and another. Men were torn apart. Ammo ships vanished in fire. Destroyers panicked. The Japanese radio operators screamed one word into their headsets. Akuma. Devil. Because this wasn't a normal boat. It was a tiny wooden craft flying across the ocean at 40 knots, armed with the nose cannon of a P-39 Airacobra fighter plane, and it was hunting the Imperial Japanese Navy. This is the real story of the most terrifying small boats of World War II, boats so deadly that the Japanese believed they were cursed. The American PT boats, the war that needed something new. By 1942, the Pacific War was going badly. The Japanese Empire controlled island after island. Their navy was larger. Their night fighting skills were superior. Their destroyers ruled the sea after sunset. American battleships were too slow. Cruisers were too valuable to risk close to shore. Aircraft couldn't always find targets in darkness. The U.S. Navy needed something radical, something cheap, something fast, something that could strike at night and disappear before the enemy could react. That answer came in the form of a boat that most admirals laughed at. A wooden boat. The birth of the PT boat. They were officially called patrol torpedo boats, but everyone shortened it to PT boats. They were small, only about 80 feet long, built from mahogany and plywood. To traditional naval officers, they looked ridiculous. Wooden boats in a modern naval war, against steel destroyers and cruisers. Many officers called them floating coffins. But the men who designed them had a different vision. These boats weren't meant to survive hits. They were meant to never be hit at all. Speed was their armor. Each PT boat had 3 massive gasoline engines. Together, they produced over 4,000 horsepower. That made them insanely fast. At full throttle, they could skim across the waves at 40 to 45 knots. Faster than most destroyers. They were so fast that, at night, they seemed to appear out of nowhere and then vanish. But speed alone wasn't enough. They needed firepower. A ridiculous idea that changed everything. At first, PT boats carried torpedoes and machine guns. But torpedoes were unreliable. They often missed. Sometimes they didn't explode. The crews wanted something immediate. Something that could kill with one shot. That's when someone had a crazy idea. What if we mount an aircraft cannon? On a boat? Not a naval gun. An airplane gun. The P-39 Airacobra connection. The P-39 Airacobra was a U.S. fighter aircraft with a unique feature. A 37mm cannon mounted directly in its nose. This cannon could punch through armor, rip aircraft apart, and destroy ground targets. Some P-39s were damaged or obsolete, so PT crews did what wartime crews always do. They stole the gun. They ripped the 37mm cannon out of the airplane. Then they bolted it to the deck of a wooden boat. No armor, no protection, just raw firepower. When the first PT boat fired it at sea, everyone realized something terrifying had been created. This thing shouldn't exist. The recoil alone was enough to shake the entire boat. Wood creaked. Metal screamed. Crewmen held on for their lives. But the shell flew straight, and when it hit, Japanese patrol craft were torn open like paper. Ammo ships exploded instantly. One PT commander later said, "It felt like firing a fighter plane from the ocean." The Japanese had never seen anything like it. Night hunters of the Pacific. PT boats only hunted at night. They painted them black. No lights, no radio chatter. Crews trained their eyes to see shadows on water. They would idle silently, listening. Then suddenly, engines roaring, cannons firing, machine guns blazing. Before Japanese ships could even turn their guns, the PT boats were gone. The Japanese began to fear them. Japanese sailors started telling stories. Stories of ghost boats, of wooden craft that couldn't be sunk, of cannons that came from nowhere. Some claimed the boats were possessed. Others said Americans had made a deal with demons. Soon a nickname spread through Japanese naval circles. Akuma no Fune, devil boats. And this was only the beginning, because the Americans didn't stop at aircraft cannons. They added rocket launchers, flamethrowers, more guns. These boats would soon face destroyers, battleships, and entire convoys. And in one night battle, a single PT boat would change the course of a campaign. Night battles, destroyers, and the rise of the devil boats. They attacked when warships slept. Japanese destroyers ruled the night. Their crews were trained to fight in darkness. Their ships carried deadly long-range torpedoes. They believed small boats were no threat. That belief got them killed. PT boat crews learned one rule: attack at the moment of maximum confusion. They waited for rain, for moonless nights, for moments when engines masked sound. Then they struck. The first real test. In the waters around Guadalcanal, Japanese supply convoys ran every night. They called it the Tokyo Express. Fast destroyers carried troops, ammo, and food under cover of darkness. American cruisers couldn't intercept them in time. So PT boats were sent instead. Many officers thought it was suicide, wooden boats against steel destroyers. But the PT crews were young, aggressive, and hungry to prove themselves. A tiny boat versus a giant destroyer. On one moonless night in 1942, radar picked up a Japanese destroyer group. 3 PT boats moved in, engines cut. They drifted silently. At less than 800 yards, the commander gave the order. Fire! Torpedoes streaked toward the destroyers. One missed, one ran too deep. But the third exploded under a Japanese ship. The blast lifted the destroyer out of the water. Before the enemy could respond, the PT boats charged forward. Machine guns opened up. The 37mm cannon fired again. Deck crews were shredded. Bridge windows shattered. Then, smoke, speed, darkness. The PT boats vanished. The Japanese destroyer burned through the night. The psychological impact. Even when PT boats didn't sink ships, they terrified crews. Japanese sailors now knew the night was no longer safe. Every shadow could hide a devil boat. Destroyer captains began zigzagging. Convoys slowed down. Searchlights swept constantly. This alone disrupted supply lines. And in war, disruption kills. Improvisation becomes a weapon. PT crews were famous for breaking rules. Official manuals said no extra weapons. The crews laughed. They mounted rocket launchers, 50 cal machine guns, aircraft cannons, even grenades taped to poles. One crew mounted 8 rockets on the bow. When fired together, the effect was horrifying. A Japanese officer later wrote, "The sea itself seemed to attack us. The enemy adapts." The Japanese were not stupid. They began mounting automatic cannons on barges. They used flares to light the sea. They deployed aircraft at dawn to hunt PT bases. When they found PT boats in daylight, they destroyed them mercilessly. Wood burned easily. PT crews knew one truth: if caught in daylight, you die. Life on a PT boat. Conditions were brutal. Fuel fumes everywhere. Engines deafening. No armor. No real bunks. Crews slept when they could, ate canned food, drank warm water, and every night they went back out. Because if they didn't, Japanese troops would reach the islands. The famous commander, one PT commander, would later become world famous. Lieutenant John F. Kennedy. His boat, PT-109, was cut in half by a Japanese destroyer. The boat exploded. 2 men died instantly. But Kennedy refused to abandon his crew. He swam for hours, towing an injured sailor with his teeth gripping a life vest strap. That story would become legend. And it proved something important. PT boats weren't just machines. They were crewed by men who refused to quit. Why the Japanese hated them? PT boats were unpredictable. They didn't fight like ships. They attacked, ran, came back, hit again. Japanese sailors said, "They do not fight honorably. They strike like thieves in the dark." That was exactly the point. And then came the deadliest upgrade. The Americans realized something. Speed plus surprise wasn't enough. They needed one-shot kills. So they added bigger cannons. Some PT boats carried 40mm Bofors guns, anti-aircraft weapons powerful enough to rip open steel hulls. Now a PT boat could kill with a single hit. The devil boats had grown fangs. But the most terrifying battle was still ahead. In the next mission, a handful of PT boats would face overwhelming Japanese forces. No air cover, no backup, no escape, and one commander would make a decision that shocked even his own men. The night of no escape, when devil boats faced certain death. The mission: they were not supposed to survive. By late 1943, PT boats were no longer an experiment. They were a problem, and the Japanese Navy wanted that problem erased. Intelligence reports warned of a massive Japanese movement. Multiple destroyers, barges, and escort craft moving troops between islands. The order given to the PT crews was simple: delay them, at any cost. Not destroy, not win, just delay. Every minute mattered. 6 wooden boats against steel. Only 6 PT boats were available that night. No cruisers, no destroyers, no air support. Just 6 wooden hulls and men who knew what failure meant. If the Japanese landed their troops, hundreds of Americans and Marines on nearby islands would die. The PT commanders understood the math. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and once discovered, they would be hunted relentlessly. The trap closes. Radar picked up Japanese ships moving fast. Too fast. This wasn't a convoy. It was a hunter group. Japanese commanders had learned. They suspected PT boats would be waiting. Searchlights snapped on. Flares burst in the sky. Suddenly, the ocean turned white. The PT boats were exposed. All engines full. The lead PT commander didn't hesitate. There was no retreat now. He grabbed the radio and shouted, "All boats, attack independently." Break formation. It was chaos by design. Each PT boat charged from a different direction. Machine guns roared. Rockets streaked across the water. The 37 Miller cannon fired again and again. One Japanese escort ship took a direct hit. Its bridge vanished in flame. Another PT boat launched torpedoes at point-blank range. One struck home. The explosion lit the sea like daylight. Return fire. Then the Japanese answered. Automatic cannons opened up. Tracer fire filled the air. Wood splintered. Fuel ignited. One PT boat was hit in the engine room. Flames shot 30 feet into the air. The crew jumped into the water as ammunition cooked off. The boat exploded moments later. There were no survivors. Running while fighting. PT boats did not stand and duel. They ran, turned, fired, and vanished into smoke. But the Japanese were ready. Destroyers accelerated. Their shells landed close enough to throw PT boats out of the water. One commander later said, "It felt like the ocean was punching us." The devil moment. One PT boat, badly damaged, couldn't outrun a destroyer. Engines failing, fuel leaking. The Japanese ship closed the distance. At less than 300 yards, the PT commander made a decision that stunned his crew. He turned toward the destroyer. Straight at it, the 40-meter Bofors fired. One shell. It punched into the destroyer's superstructure. Then another. Fire erupted on deck. The destroyer veered off, fearing torpedoes that never came. That moment saved the PT boat, a bluff. Backed by pure audacity. The cost of the night. By dawn, the sea was quiet. Of the 6 PT boats, 2 were destroyed. 1 was crippled. 3 limped back full of holes. Dozens of Japanese sailors were dead. More importantly, the troop landing was delayed. That delay saved an entire garrison. The mission succeeded. Why this battle mattered. The Japanese Navy now understood something terrifying. PT boats were not targets. They were disruptors. They didn't need to sink fleets. They just needed to make everything harder, slower, riskier, more expensive. And in a war of logistics, that was deadly. The reputation becomes permanent. After that night, Japanese captains issued standing orders. Avoid narrow waters at night. Fire on any unidentified wake. Assume PT boats are present, even when unseen. Fear had become doctrine. The devil boats no longer needed to appear. Their idea was enough, but the war was changing. By 1944, American air power dominated the Pacific. Carriers ruled the sea. PT boats were no longer the spear tip, but they were still needed. For raids, for rescues, for missions no one else could do. And in one final role, they would prove their value one last time. The Last Hunt, legacy of the devil boats. When the war outgrew the devil boats. By 1944, the Pacific Ocean had changed. American aircraft carriers now dominated the skies. Radar covered huge distances. Battles were decided from hundreds of miles away. The war no longer belonged to small wooden boats. PT crews knew it. Their missions became fewer, but more dangerous. Now they were sent where no one else could go. The most unexpected mission. One night, a message arrived. An American bomber crew had ditched near enemy-held islands. Rescue by submarine was impossible. Daylight rescue meant death. Only PT boats could try. 3 boats went in. No guns firing, no torpedoes. Engines kept low. Japanese shore positions were everywhere. One wrong move and the rescue would become a massacre. Into the mouth of the enemy. As the PT boats approached the island, a flare went up. Then another. Searchlights swept the water. The crews froze. Engines idled. They drifted like dead logs. A Japanese patrol passed less than 50 yards away. No one breathed. Then the signal. A hand waved from the water. Rescue under fire. The PT crew hauled the airmen aboard. Wounded. Burned. Barely alive. As they turned to leave, machine gun fire erupted from the shore. Tracers stitched the water. Engines roared. The PT boats fled at full speed. One boat took hits. Fuel leaked. But they made it. All airmen survived. The quiet end of a loud weapon. By late 1945, the war ended. PT boats returned to bases. Many were scrapped, burned, sold, forgotten. There were no victory parades for them. No massive memorials, just tired crews going home. Why they disappeared? PT boats were perfect for a very specific war. But peace brought new realities. Jets replaced prop planes. Missiles replaced guns. Radar made surprise harder. Wooden boats with exposed crews no longer made sense, so they vanished. But the legacy remained. Modern navies learned from them. Fast attack craft, swarm tactics, hit-and-run warfare, all traced back to PT boats. Every missile boat today carries their DNA, what the Japanese remembered. After the war, Japanese naval officers were interviewed. One was asked, "What frightened you most at sea?" He didn't mention carriers. He didn't mention battleships. He said, "The small boats at night. You never knew where they were, or when they would strike." The final truth. PT boats were not the strongest. They were not the safest. They were not built to last. They were built to terrify, to appear suddenly, to hit brutally, to disappear like ghosts. That is why the Japanese called them devil boats. They didn't win the war alone, but they made the enemy afraid of the dark. And sometimes, fear is more powerful than firepower. If you enjoyed this true World War II story, like the video, subscribe for more untold battles, and tell us in the comments. Would you have served on a devil boat?